The easier-to-understand version of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, adapted by Sarah Simpson. Chapter 6. One day, a newspaper reporter came to Gatsby's house. The reporter asked Gatsby if he had anything to say. Anything to say about what? Gatsby asked politely. The reporter told Gatsby that he had heard Gatsby's name brought up in connection with some illegal activity. The reporter had showed up to see if Gatsby was involved. There were new rumors about Gatsby. Someone said that he had an underground pipeline to smuggle alcohol into the United States from Canada. Someone said that his house wasn't really a house, but a huge boat he used to hide from the law by moving it down the shore whenever there was trouble with police. James Gatz. That was Jay Gatsby's real name, and this is the real story of Gatsby's life. James Gatz's parents were poor, lazy farmers from Minnesota. In his mind, they couldn't possibly be his real parents. James Gatz invented Jay Gatsby and made him the sort of person every teenage boy wants to be: rich, charming, successful, and a world traveler. Every night he would lie in bed, imagining his future, wishing for it all to come true. Right after high school, when James Gatz was 17, he went to St. Olaf College in Minnesota. He knew that going to college would help him have a better life, but he was too impatient to be rich and famous to go to school. He dropped out after 2 weeks. The next summer, he worked at jobs that got him enough money to eat and a place to sleep, and not much more. He changed his name when he first met his mentor, Dan Cody. Young James Gatz had seen Dan Cody's huge boat and decided he wanted to meet him. James Gatz stole a rowboat and took it out to Dan Cody's huge boat to tell him that a storm was coming. It was really just a way to meet Dan Cody, to talk to him. Dan Cody was 50 years old when Gatsby first met him. Cody got rich drilling for oil in Alaska. He was very, very rich. His body was in great shape, but his mind was starting to go. It was probably what people call today early onset dementia. Women knew this and tried to take advantage of him. One of those women was a reporter named Ella Kay. She told him to go sailing on his boat full time. She wanted to go with him, so she told him she wanted to write a news story about his adventures. When Gatsby met him, he had been sailing on his boat with Ella Kay for 5 years. With his beautiful boat, beautiful girl, and huge bank account, Dan Cody was everything Gatsby wanted to be. Cody liked Gatsby and hired him to help out on the boat. They sailed all over the world to lots of exotic places. Cody liked to drink. When he was drunk, he spent too much money and made bad decisions. As time went on and his mind got worse, Cody trusted Gatsby to handle more and more of his money. It was like this for 5 years until Cody died. All of Cody's money went to his mistress, and Gatsby didn't get money. Gatsby had learned a lot about how to fit in with rich people from Dan Cody, and that was worth almost as much as money. Gatsby didn't tell me all of this until much later, but I think that by telling you this information now, you'll understand him better. After the tea party, I didn't talk to Gatsby for weeks. I was busy with working with Jordan, and I didn't think about him very much. One afternoon, I thought about him, so I walked over to his house. I sat on the front porch and waited for the butler to tell Gatsby I was there. A few minutes later, I was surprised to see Tom Buchanan and 2 other people ride up on horses. They stopped at Gatsby's house to have a drink. "I'm glad you came by," Gatsby said to Tom and the 2 people with him. "Sit down, have a cigarette or cigar. We'll have some drinks." Gatsby was very nervous. Daisy's husband was having a drink on his porch, and he had to act like nothing was wrong. Tom had no idea what was going on. "I think we've met before," Gatsby said to Tom. "Yes," Tom said, trying to be polite. "I remember." I could tell Tom did not remember meeting Gatsby. "I know your wife," Gatsby said. "Is that so?" Tom said, bored. Tom turned to me. "Do you live near here, Nick?" Tom said. "Yes," I said, "next door." "Is that so?" Tom said, still bored. "We need to get home," said Mr. Sloan, the man who had been riding horses with Tom. "Don't hurry," Gatsby said. He wanted to spend longer talking to Tom. He wanted to understand what it was about Tom that had made Daisy marry him. "Why don't you stay and have dinner?" "You should come have dinner at my house," said the woman who had ridden in on her horse with Tom and Mr. Sloan. I thought she was Mr. Sloan's wife or girlfriend. "Let's get going," Mr. Sloan said to the woman, trying to get her to leave. "I mean it," she said to me and Gatsby. "Both of you should come to dinner tonight." Gatsby looked at me. He wasn't sure what to do. I could tell he wanted to go to dinner, but he didn't see that Mr. Sloane didn't want him there. I'm sorry, I can't come tonight, I said. I was hoping Gatsby would take the hint and would also say he couldn't come. Mr. Sloane whispered something in the girl's ear. He was telling her to stop trying to get Gatsby to come. I don't have a horse, Gatsby said, but I can follow you in my car. Wait here while I go get the car. Gatsby went to get the car. My God, Tom said. I can't believe he didn't take the hint. He's actually coming. She said she wanted him to come, I said. What was he supposed to think? Tom frowned. I wonder where he met Daisy, Tom said. I may be old-fashioned, but I don't think Daisy should have been allowed to run around meeting any crazy guy who came along. Suddenly, Mr. Sloane and the woman walked down the steps and got on their horses. Let's go, Tom, Mr. Sloane said, and then he said to me, Tell Gatsby we had to go. Tom and I shook hands, and they all rode away. Just then, Gatsby came out the front door. The next week, Tom and Daisy came to Gatsby's party. Tom being there made everything weird. The party wasn't as fun as it usually was, and there was a negative feeling the whole night. There was still drinking and dancing like always, but it just didn't seem as fun. Maybe I'd just gotten used to all the craziness, and watching Daisy's reaction to it all made it seem worse. Tom and Daisy showed up just as the sun was setting. Daisy was using her voice to get attention. Parties are so exciting, she whispered to me, joking. Nick, if you want to kiss me tonight, just let me know. Look around, Gatsby said. Look at all the famous and important people who come here. Tom looked around. He wasn't impressed. We don't go to a lot of parties, Tom said. I don't know any of these people you are talking about. Even though the people at the party were famous, they didn't come from old money like Tom and Daisy. Tom thought he was better than them. He was uncomfortable being at a party with people that weren't like him. Maybe you know that lady, Gatsby said. He pointed to a pretty young woman. She was a famous movie actress. She's very pretty, Daisy said. Gatsby took us around and introduced us to different groups. Gatsby introduced Tom to everyone as the polo player. Tom didn't like it, which made Gatsby say it even more. Tom wasn't having fun. Daisy and Gatsby danced. It was the first time I ever saw him dance at one of his parties. He was a good dancer. After that, Daisy and Gatsby went and sat on the front porch of my house talking for 30 minutes, while I watched to make sure Tom didn't catch them. When it was time to eat dinner, we all came back together. Do you mind if I eat with some people over there? Tom asked Daisy. One of the guys is really funny. Go ahead, Daisy said to Tom. If you want to write down any girls' phone numbers, you can borrow my pencil. Tom went off to sit at the other table. A few minutes later, Daisy looked over. Tom was sitting with a girl. Daisy didn't look surprised. Except for the 30 minutes talking to Gatsby, she wasn't having fun. The people Daisy and I sat with to eat dinner were drunk and loud. I sat with the same people 2 weeks ago and thought they were funny. Now, they just seemed annoying. Daisy said she liked seeing the famous actress earlier, but that was the only thing she liked about Gatsby's party. Daisy lived in East Egg, and people didn't get drunk and act rude and crazy at parties there. I sat with Tom and Daisy while they waited for their car to pick them up. Who exactly is this Gatsby guy anyway? Tom said. Is he some big bootlegger? Where did you hear that? I asked. I didn't hear it. I thought up the idea myself, Tom said. A lot of these people who get rich all of a sudden are just big bootleggers. Gatsby isn't like that, I said. Tom didn't say anything else for a minute. Gatsby must have had to do something to throw a party like this, Tom said snobbishly. I could tell he wasn't impressed with a big rowdy party. At least the people at his party were more interesting than the people who come to our parties, Daisy said to Tom. You didn't look like you thought they were interesting, Tom said to Daisy. You looked uncomfortable. When that one drunk girl asked you to put her into a cold shower, you looked like you wanted to run out of here screaming. Lots of people show up at these parties who weren't invited. That girl is one of those people. Gatsby doesn't even know that girl. He's just too nice to tell her to go away, Daisy said. I still want to know who this Gatsby is and how he makes all his money, Tom said. I'm going to find out. Gatsby made his money owning drugstores, Daisy said. He built his business and earned his money. Tom and Daisy's limo pulled up and they left. I thought about Daisy. I think she didn't like the party because she was used to having a proper life with lots of rules about how to behave. Seeing everyone at Gatsby's party behaving any way they wanted to was strange for her. Daisy couldn't even imagine living a life where she would get drunk and make a fool of herself at a party. There was something romantic and exciting about Gatsby's life that Daisy couldn't understand. Gatsby asked me to stay after the party so we could talk. When I saw him, he looked unhappy and tired. Daisy didn't like the party, Gatsby said. Of course she liked it, I lied. She didn't like it. She didn't have a good time, Gatsby said. I feel far away from her. It's hard to make her understand. Hard to understand all the drinking and dancing, I asked, confused. Not the drinking and dancing. That doesn't even matter, Gatsby said. Gatsby meant that Daisy could never understand how much he had idolized her. For 5 years he had lived for her. He had fantasized about seeing her again. In his fantasy, Daisy would go to Tom and tell him, I never loved you. In his fantasy, Gatsby and Daisy would pick up their relationship right where they left off. It would be like her marriage and her child had never happened. Nothing less than that would be enough to make Gatsby happy, but what he wanted was impossible. Daisy used to understand me, Gatsby said again. We used to sit and talk for hours. Gatsby stopped talking and started to pace back and forth. He was upset. Don't ask too much of Daisy, I said. You can't repeat the past. Can't repeat the past? Gatsby said, surprised. Why, of course you can. I'm going to fix everything. Daisy and I will be just like we were before. She'll see. Gatsby was always talking about the past. I think he wanted to be with Daisy because being with her reminded him of when he was young. Back then, he knew who he wanted to be and what he wanted to do with his life. Nothing had turned out the way he wanted it to. If he could just be with Daisy again, everything else in his life would be good again. The night when Gatsby fell in love with Daisy 5 years ago, he knew that his life would change forever. When he kissed her, he knew his whole life would be different. He kissed her, and nothing was ever the same again. Listening to Gatsby talk about his love for Daisy reminded me of something, but I couldn't figure out what it was.